I didn't know she was my CEO when I followed her into the cafe that evening. She was just a woman in her early 40s, graceful in a quiet way, wearing a tailored coat that had seen better days, standing in line while two college-age baristas whispered and snickered behind the counter. The place was crowded, all clinking cups and low laughter, and I would have missed the moment entirely if the boy at the register hadn't smirked and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "You know this place is more for younger people, right?" A few heads turned. Someone laughed. The woman stiffened, not in anger, but in something worse, practiced humiliation. She smiled politely, the way people do when they've learned that dignity sometimes means swallowing fire. "Just a black coffee," she said. The barista glanced at her silver-threaded hair and added, "We also have decaf if you're worried about your heart." That was when something inside me snapped. I don't know why I spoke up. Maybe because my mother had been treated the same way. Maybe because the woman's eyes flicked down for just a second, and in that second I saw a lifetime of earned authority reduced to a punchline. I stepped forward and said, calmly but clearly, "She didn't ask for your opinion. She asked for coffee." The cafe went quiet. The barista flushed. Someone behind me murmured approval. The woman turned to look at me then, really look, and for the first time that night, she smiled, not politely, but genuinely. "Thank you," she said, and there was weight in those two words. We sat at neighboring tables, and I tried not to stare, but I could feel her presence like gravity. When she stood to leave, she paused by my table. "I'm Elena," she said. "Would you like to join me for a walk?" I said yes without thinking. Outside, the city hummed, and she told me about being underestimated, about boardrooms where her age was called experience when it suited them and expiration when it didn't. I told her about my job, my doubts, my fear of speaking up too late in life. She listened like every word mattered. When we reached her car, she hesitated. "Tonight," she said softly, "you reminded me who I am." She handed me her card. The name on it made my breath catch. Elena Marrow. CEO. My CEO. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about power, age, and courage shifted. That night didn't end at the cafe, or on the sidewalk, or even when I lay awake replaying every second of our conversation. It ended weeks later, in a way I never could have predicted, but it began the next morning when Elena walked into the office and our eyes met across the conference room. There was no special treatment, no lingering looks, just a subtle nod that said, "I remember." Rumors spread fast when a CEO is a woman who doesn't apologize for her age, and faster still when she announces a company-wide initiative on age equity and respect. I watched her stand at the podium, calm and unshakable, and I realized that speaking up hadn't just changed her night, it had reignited something fierce in her. She called me into her office days later, not to thank me, but to challenge me. "You spoke when it mattered," she said. "Now do it again. Lead this project." I was terrified. I was honored. I accepted. We worked late nights, arguing, laughing, pushing each other. Somewhere between spreadsheets and shared takeout, something deeper formed, not a scandal, not a fantasy, but a partnership rooted in mutual respect. One evening, months later, after the policy passed and the company culture began to shift, she invited me back to that same cafe. The baristas had changed. The room felt different. She ordered a black coffee. No comments. No laughter. She looked at me and said, "That night, you didn't just defend me. You reminded everyone watching that dignity doesn't expire." There was softness in her eyes then, and warmth, and possibility. Our lives didn't change because of romance alone, they changed because courage has a way of multiplying. She grew bolder. I grew braver. And together, in ways neither of us expected, we rewrote the story people tried to tell about age, power, and worth. If you believe one moment of courage can change everything, if you believe standing up matters even when your voice shakes, then this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this are coming, stories where ordinary moments become extraordinary, and one brave choice changes a life forever. The real change didn't arrive with applause or headlines. It crept in quietly, the way truth often does, reshaping lives before anyone realizes what's happening. After the cafe incident became an unspoken legend inside the company, people began watching Elena differently, not because she demanded it, but because confidence has a way of commanding space. Meetings shifted. Interruptions stopped mid-sentence. Jokes that once hid behind harmless humor vanished. And I, someone who had always blended into the background, found myself standing beside her in rooms where decisions were made, my voice steady even when my heart wasn't. Late one night, after a brutal board meeting where her age had again been weaponized in polished language, she asked me to stay behind. The city lights spilled through the glass walls of her office, reflecting years of pressure etched into her posture. For the first time since that cafe night, she looked tired. Not weak, just human. She told me about the early years, about being the youngest woman in every room and now suddenly being treated as if she were the oldest problem. They don't fear my age, she said quietly. They fear what I've survived. Something in her voice cracked, not enough for tears, but enough to break a wall. I told her what I had never said aloud, that speaking up that night wasn't bravery, it was instinct, because watching her be diminished felt like watching the future insulted. Silence stretched between us, heavy but honest. Then she laughed softly, the sound of someone finally exhaling. Over the weeks that followed, our connection deepened, not recklessly, not secretly, but carefully, intentionally. We challenged each other. She pushed me toward leadership I never believed I deserved. I reminded her she didn't need to earn the right to exist loudly. When the company finally announced her reappointment after a tense vote, she didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. She called me instead. We went back to the cafe one last time before it closed for the night. Same tables. Same door. Different world. As we sat there, she reached across the table and said, "That night changed my life. But this, what we built after, that's what saved it." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was real. Two people meeting at the intersection of courage and timing, proving that age is not a limit, it's a story still being written. And if this chapter moved you, if you believe one voice can shift an entire room, subscribe to the channel, because the next story might remind you of your own moment to speak up, and the life it could change. I used to think transformation was loud, that it arrived with ultimatums, grand speeches, or dramatic exits. I was wrong. Transformation is quiet. It's the steady accumulation of moments when you choose not to look away. Months after the board vote, the company felt different, not perfect, but awake. Younger employees listened more. Older ones spoke without apology. Elena no longer softened her language to make others comfortable, and somehow that gave everyone else permission to do the same. As for us, we moved carefully, knowing the world loves to mislabel connection when power is involved. What we shared wasn't built in shadows, it was built in conversations, in trust, in the kind of respect that doesn't need witnesses. One evening, after a long day of mentoring sessions she had personally insisted on leading, We sat alone in the office kitchen, the hum of vending machines filling the silence. She told me she had turned down an offer, another company, bigger title, more money. For the first time, she said, I'm not running from how people see me. I'm standing where I am. I realized then that the cafe incident hadn't just defended her dignity, it had set a boundary the world was finally forced to respect. She asked me what I wanted next, not as a subordinate, not as an ally, but as myself. I told her the truth, I wanted a life where I didn't wait for permission to matter. She smiled, the same genuine smile from that first night, and said, then don't. When we eventually stepped forward publicly, no scandal, no drama, just honesty, the reaction surprised everyone. There was resistance, of course, but there was also something stronger, admiration. Not because of who we were together, but because of what we represented, a refusal to be boxed in by age, hierarchy, or fear. The cafe closed a year later. On its last night, we stood outside the locked door, lights off, sign dark. Elena squeezed my hand and said, funny how a place meant to make me feel small ended up changing everything. I looked at her and understood that some moments don't just alter lives, they redefine what's possible. If this story reminded you that courage can start in the smallest spaces, that speaking up can echo far beyond one night, then subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming, stories about quiet bravery, unexpected connections, and the moments that change us forever when we dare to say something instead of nothing.